offers you something, obviously. That's very, very, very clear. But it doesn't make it true. It doesn't make the existence claims of Christianity true. It's all obvious nonsense. This is all theological bullshit. It's a scientific hypothesis that there is a supernatural creator. See how you can get to that of personal comfort or feelings of political necessity. You have to get to that from thinking. Let's take the moral thing first. Islam is a nasty religion. I think we agree about that. But Christianity is not all that nice either. And when you think about Christianity, Christianity is obsessed with sin. St. Augustine said that we all inherit the sin of Adam. Well, of course he didn't exist, but so we inherit original sin. Original sin came down in the semen. Jesus was not conceived with semen, that's why he's clear of sin. His mother Mary had to be clear of sin as well, so she had to have an immaculate conception. This is all obvious nonsense. This is all theological bullshit. And the idea that humanity is born in sin and has to be cured of sin by Jesus being crucified, Jesus being punished for all our sins. And that is a morally very unpleasant idea. I'm sure you must agree about that.
I find that Christianity is actually obsessed with love, and that the teachings of the teaching of Christ, as I see it, and again, I'm a brand new Christian, but what I'm finding out, which is the opposite of growing up as a Muslim, the message of Islam, but the message of Christianity I get is that it's a message of love, it's a message of redemption, and it's a story of renewal and rebirth. And so Jesus dying and rising again, for me, symbolizes that story. And in a small way, I felt like I had died and I was reborn. And that story of redemption and rebirth, I think makes Christianity actually a very, very powerful story for the human condition and human existence, and the pain of suffering, but also our internal, the recognition of what you call sin, but perhaps the character defects, that both good and evil are there, but that both good and evil are in us. I think those teachings in Christianity are far more powerful and have led to, I think, the flourishing of Western civilization, compared to, say, growing up as a Muslim, when I was taught that really the only way for you to be faithful is to fear, naked fear, and to have these sets of obligations which you basically obey. And that was very much about power, it was centered around hellfire and all of these other things. And so Christianity, as I experienced, I'll give you an example. When I was an atheist and I was going all over both the United States and all over Europe, mocking Christians, making fun of them, making fun of faith, as you're doing now, dear Richard. I was walking with 6 to 7 men at any given time, protecting me, armed, from things that I said that were offensive to Muslims, or Muslims thought were offensive to them. Christians were writing me letters saying, you know, we're going to pray for you, you're misguided. And I think that alone defines for me the distinction between Christianity in general, mainstream Christianity, and mainstream Islam.
Richard Dawkins is absolutely right to call the concept of original sin irrational. The entire idea depends on Adam and Eve being real historical people. But they weren't. Genetics proves that humans never came from a single couple. The Human Genome Project and later studies show that our species descended from a population of at least several thousand early humans, not 2. The claim that sin is passed through semen and that Jesus had to be born without it to stay pure is not just pseudoscientific, it's based on ancient misunderstandings of biology. We now know that moral behavior, empathy, and cooperation evolved through natural selection long before Christianity existed. You don't need sin or supernatural sacrifice to explain human decency. And the crucifixion as a form of cosmic justice? Think about it. An all-powerful God creates a system where he needs to kill his own son to forgive people he made imperfect. That's not justice. That's primitive blood magic. It's the same mindset that drove ancient cultures to sacrifice goats or people to please their gods. In every measurable way, history, science, and ethics, Dawkins's view holds up. Christianity isn't morally superior. It's just better marketed.
Well, I must say, I've never met a vicar that I didn't like. I mean, they're always very, very nice people.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, the stuff they believe is obvious nonsense. And you have to take the whole package, because, I mean, you talked about Jesus rising from the dead. You don't believe Jesus rose from the dead, surely?
I choose to believe that Jesus rose from the dead.
You choose to believe it?
Yes, and that is a matter of choice. And it's a matter, I think it has to go back to, is there something or is there nothing? And I think you start with, there is nothing. And yes, for years I agreed with you, there's nothing. But if you come round to the idea that there might be something much more powerful than we are, something that caused everything else, then something like Jesus rising out of the dead, or these other miracles, Jesus being born out of a virgin, for that higher power is not a big deal. But again, it's a matter of choice, and it is just different planes of perception. And I think here on this plane of perception, having been a former atheist, I don't think this is something we're going to resolve tonight or agree on right now.
Well,
and so that is where I think it's perhaps more interesting, even if you choose not to believe, to say, let's at least talk about the value of Christianity for today. For I look at these universities, the most illustrious universities of the West, and you've all shared with me images of young women draped in kefirs, the symbol of Hamas, performing the Muslim prayer. And tell me if those kids are not morally and utterly lost. And Queers for Palestine. So while you and I and Stephen Pinker and all of those wonderful people were locked up in our ivory towers, let's ask ourselves what was happening on the ground, because in the last 6 decades, we pretty much demonized Christianity and the teachings of Christianity out of the public space, out of school, out of universities. And a vacuum occurred, and that vacuum is now being filled, as G.K. Chesterton said, not because people have come to reason, but because now they'll believe in anything. There are very awful forces today out there that are claiming the hearts and minds and souls of these young students. And when you say there is nothing, you offer them nothing.
We're getting into the bigger political, cultural question. I just feel it's worth pressing one more time on this. What you said, agree to disagree, and I understand, having read Richard's letter to you, that literal belief is the bit that he can't get past. Are you saying that you don't literally believe those things? You talked about planes of reality. Is it that you see a beauty in those things and choose to suspend your rational judgment, or do you literally believe them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something subjective, and there's a choice. There are things that you see and perceive that a different person cannot perceive. Art, music. In fact, I think you do enjoy a great deal of Christian art and music. I will look at a painting by Pollock, and I will think my 6-year-old must have spilled all the paint on the canvas and run around. And people are crazy enough to pay millions of dollars and hang it on walls. But I've actually seen people be moved to tears staring at a Pollock. That is a plane of perception that is real, but that's also very, very difficult to measure. And it's the same the way you're moved by certain pieces of music. So the fact that I have faith, and I choose to have faith because of what I've experienced, is just as real for me as it is for the millions of people who believe. But for me, what is even more real is it's the story itself and the wisdom in that story, the morality that has come out, that has evolved out of that story, the internal debates of millennia long and everything that we inherited from it. It's just too casual to cast that aside. And when we've done it, I think we have caused ourselves a great deal of damage.
Richard, having heard that story, that moving story from Ayaan of clearly how her conversion has helped her, and also she's explained in beautiful words the mode in which she believes it, do you still say you are not a Christian?
No, not at all. I came here prepared to persuade you, Ayaan, you're not a Christian. I think you are a Christian, and I think Christianity is nonsense. You have to be, I mean, you appear to be a theist. You appear to believe in some kind of higher power. Now, I think that the hypothesis of theism is the most exciting scientific hypothesis that you could possibly hold. And the idea that the universe was actually created by a supernatural intelligence is a dramatic, important idea. If it were true, it would completely change everything we know. We'd be living in a totally different universe. Now that's a big thing. I'm sorry, but it's bigger than personal comfort and nice stories and things. The idea that the universe has lurking beneath it an intelligence, a supernatural intelligence that invented the laws of physics, that invented mathematics. I mean, that is a stupendous idea, if it's true. And to me, that simply dwarfs all talk of nobility and morality and comfort and that sort of thing.
So would you have preferred for your erstwhile new atheist colleague, Ayaan, not to have converted? Having heard her story, would you rather...
No, I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying that religious belief is bigger than what gives you comfort. Or it's bigger than morality, it's bigger than what gives you comfort, it's bigger than what gives you a bulwark against Islam. It's something huge, it's something terrific, and it's false.
Ayaan says belief is a choice, something she feels, like music or art. But here's the problem. Truth doesn't work like that. Whether or not Jesus rose from the dead isn't a matter of personal perspective. Either it happened or it didn't. And there's no evidence it did. No Roman records, no contemporary accounts, nothing outside Christian tradition written decades later. Even theologians admit the resurrection isn't provable. It's an article of faith. She also claims Christianity led to the flourishing of Western civilization. But history tells a different story. The scientific revolution happened in spite of the church, not because of it. Galileo was silenced. Bruno was burned. Progress came from reason, not scripture. And when she says removing Christianity created a moral vacuum, that ignores data. Countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway are among the least religious. And yet they rank highest in peace, education, and quality of life. You don't need belief in a myth to live ethically.
It is a scientific hypothesis that there is a supernatural creator. And I don't see how you can get to that from feelings of personal comfort or feelings of political necessity. You have to get to that from thinking.
And that brings us to consciousness. So first of all, the hypothesis itself, which even if you don't allow for set religion aside, the hypothesis of where did all this come from and how did it begin, again, there is no consensus on that. There is no consensus on what consciousness is and what all that entails. But I think that it is, on an academic level, very interesting and very rewarding to look into and explore all of these different things separately on an academic level. On a non-academic level, I think that it's very useful now. I hate to go back to utility, but to have all of these things connected, where as human beings, we are material, yes, but we also are more than material. We have a sense of consciousness, and we have a range of needs. And some of these needs, reason can answer, and pure science can answer. But some of these needs cannot be answered by that. And I think faith in a higher power, in God, and in the story that makes sense of it all, gives it meaning, is very, very important for human beings. And the danger lies in trying to conflate these different planes and then casting aside as useful. It is false, it's useful, it's useless, it's unnecessary. And now we have, the range of human suffering, where as an atheist, you don't really offer an answer, you don't offer a prescription for this is a way of life, this is the path to happiness, this is how you can deal with the challenges of existence. And atheism is an attitude. It basically says, as of now, there is no evidence to show that God exists or that a higher power exists, full stop. And you figure the rest of it out. And it's very, very difficult to figure the rest of it out starting from scratch. And I think faith then gives meaning and purpose. And yes, if you're afraid of the dark, and if you're afraid of whatever it is that's causing you anxiety, or whatever is causing you self-doubt, relationships between other human beings, I think Christianity does offer a recipe, and perhaps in my view, the best recipe for not only how to live with yourself and connect to the universe, but also how to connect with fellow human beings and then bring about a civilization like this one.
Suppose it were true that atheism doesn't offer anything. Suppose it doesn't offer anything. So what? Why should it offer anything?
Ayaan says faith gives life meaning and comfort. But comfort isn't evidence, and that's exactly Dawkins's point. Just because something makes you feel better doesn't make it true. Christianity claims that a supernatural being created the universe, became human, died, and came back to life. These aren't poetic metaphors, they're concrete claims about reality. And if we care about truth, those claims need evidence. But there is none. No historical proof of the resurrection, no scientific reason to believe consciousness comes from the divine. Just emotional stories repeated over centuries. And saying atheism doesn't offer a way to live misses the point entirely. Atheism isn't supposed to hand you a prepackaged belief system. It's simply the honest position that there's no good evidence for gods. Everything else, morality, meaning, love, purpose, we build together, as humans, with reason, science, and empathy. In the end, believing something because it feels good is easy. But facing reality without illusions, that's strength.
What I do want to say is this. Faith offers you something, obviously. That's very, very, very clear. But it doesn't make it true. It doesn't make the existence claims of Christianity true. There is a difference from saying that being in a certain psychological place is consoling and comforting and offers you a meaning of life and gives you a purpose in life, all those things which are wonderful. And I have them too. They're a bit different, but I too have a purpose in life, I have a meaning in life. But just simply because something gives you a meaning and a purpose in life, it doesn't make the existential claims true. And Christianity, like any other religion, makes claims about the world, about the universe, which are either true or not true. And I may be wrong and you may be right. They may be true, but the mere fact that they're comforting doesn't make them true.
So what do you think? Is it better to believe something comforting or to follow what the evidence actually shows?
You both think or believe will happen after you die?
I imagine my wife will get married to somebody else, and actually, she's going to run off with a friend of hers and have a whole bunch of cats. Oh, you mean what's going to happen to me? I don't know. I don't see any reason to think that anything's going to happen to me. Everything that makes me me, everything that we have historically and religiously attributed to a soul that can be identified with a place has a place in the brain. My personality is in my brain. We know from experiments on people who have suffered all sorts of brain damage that you can reset people's personality, their preference, their memories, their ability to make new memories. I'm going to get the name wrong. Vishwanathan. Somebody will know. Anyway, did a talk at one of the religion summits about a split brain patient, hemispherectomy. They can communicate with both halves, and each half has a separate personality and a separate identity and communicates independently. One half, Christian. The other half, atheist. Now, I guess you could argue that when we split that brain in half, there was only enough soul for one side, and the other side just got, shafted. But everything we know about what makes us us, our likes, our preferences, our desires, they're all a product of the brain. Now, a lot of theists would say that there's a soul behind it all, as a puppet master, the ghost in the machine. And yet there's no evidence to support this. And it doesn't make sense in the model. If I suffer severe brain damage and all of a sudden I don't remember the past, I don't remember that I love my wife, I don't like the same foods, I don't want to interact with the same people, and now all of a sudden I believe in God, am I the same person? I don't think so. Haven't we really kind of ended up with a whole new person? I have an argument that I use partially as a joke. It's an argument that demonstrates, according to some traditions, nobody's in heaven, and it's really easy. In heaven, there's no suffering and no sadness, according to some traditions. My mom is convinced she's going to heaven. She's convinced I'm going to hell. I don't know who's going to end up in heaven, but it won't be my mom. There's no way my mom could be up in heaven, not suffering and not sad that her son is in hell. And if God does some kind of magic to take that out of her, it's not my mom anymore. It's a facsimile of my mom. Some kind of robotic worshiping thing that's not my mom. My mom and I disagree vehemently on religious stuff, so much so we don't talk about it anymore because we love each other and we'd like to have a civil, Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever religious holiday drives me up there to visit and hang out. By the way, we celebrate Christmas, have a big white tree with peppermints and stuff on it. It's awesome. Entirely secular stuff. We're stealing it back because Christianity stole most of those things from other religions. And Easter too, but I'm not that big on eggs and candy because I'm diabetic. But everything that we know about us takes place in our brain. The brain gets damaged. Are you the same person? I don't know. The math on souls is confusing. Sam Harris has talked about the math on souls for people who believe that zygotes get a soul because the embryo will sometimes split and then we get together. So when it splits, does it have two souls? And then when it comes back together, does it just have one? Or now do we have a body with two souls? Or did we not put a soul in until afterwards? Or does it happen when he breathes his first breath, as the Jews believed? It doesn't make any sense. The math on souls doesn't make sense. The science on souls doesn't make any sense. There's no reason to think that there's some kind of ghost dictating what goes on in my brain. We haven't even gotten into free will. Cliff keeps asserting that we have it. I'm not convinced we do, at least not in the sense that he's talking about. I don't know what's going to happen to me when I'm dead. I'm pretty sure my body's going to rot, my brain's going to stop working, and I will cease to exist. And it didn't bother me before I was alive, so I don't see what'd bother me afterwards.
When Matt says everything we are, our thoughts, memories, personality, comes from the brain, he's not just guessing. We have real evidence for that. Brain scans show that damage to specific areas can completely change how a person behaves. People with strokes or brain injuries sometimes lose their ability to recognize loved ones, form memories, or even control their emotions. There's also the famous case of split brain patients. When the brain is divided, each half can act like its own person, sometimes with completely different beliefs. If a soul were running the show, how does that even make sense? Matt brings up a good point about heaven, too. If someone you love goes to hell, but you're not sad in heaven, are you really you anymore? It sounds more like a version of you with your emotions turned off. That's not comforting. It's unsettling. And scientifically, we've never found any evidence of a soul. No energy, no signal, no mechanism. It's all based on belief, not observation. Now, let's hear what Cliff has to say about this.
Guys, we got to be honest with each other. If there is no God, we know exactly what happens when we die. If there is no God, there's no life after death. If there is no God, you are matter and energy. And when you die, the matter and energy fall apart. So let's not act like maybe there's life after death. No, that's illogical. If there is no God, when you die, when I die, we become fertilizer. Very logical, very reasonable. But you know what the problem is? The problem is that I've got to do funerals for families that are atheist or agnostic. Inevitably, what happens to me is I'm standing there and they're coming up to me saying, well, you know, maybe, the Great Spirit. Excuse me? Great Spirit? What are you talking about? If there is no God, there's no spirit. There's matter and energy. And when we die, the matter and energy falls apart. Now, don't get scared. Just face reality. Be objective. And don't allow your fears to get you knocking your knees saying, oh, well, maybe. Oh, well, possibly. No. Be rational. Use your good mind. If there is no God, when you die, you rot. When I die, I rot. End of story. Just think about it. Now, there's an alternative to that. And the alternative is that if there's a supernatural God, then possibly there is life after death. And I can promise you, I would never believe there's life after death because I'm scared to die. That's being a wimp. That's being a coward. Instead, you'd better use your brain, and you better start thinking, and you better figure out, does the evidence point to there being something more to reality than matter and energy, there being some type of God, or does there not? And then secondly, you better use your brain, and you better think real clearly. Does the historical evidence point to Jesus having died and risen from the dead or not? And I can promise you, if you believe there's life after death because you're scared to die, you're an intellectual wimp. And I would never believe there's life after death because I find it attractive. And Matt is wrong. I don't believe there's life after death because I've got this deep longing for life after death. But I'll tell you exactly what I do. If I find that I have a deep longing for something, I look at the evidence to find out, is there any truth to it or not? And if there's no truth to it, I drop it. But if there is evidence to support it, I would be very wise to follow that evidence. Now, why do I believe there's life after death? First of all, because the evidence says there is a supernatural God. And second of all, because the historical evidence is that Jesus was dead, and 3 days later, he rose from the dead. And the people who saw him risen from the dead died not for belief. They died for what they claimed to have seen, the dead Christ risen from the dead. If you claim to have seen something like Matthew, Mark, John, Thomas, Philip, Andrew, Peter, if you claim to have seen the dead Christ risen from the dead, and then you stand before Roman soldiers, and the Roman soldiers say Caesar is Lord and live, or else maintain that Jesus is risen from the dead, and we will execute you for it. And if you stand there and say, I'm sorry, I've seen Jesus risen from the dead, that gives your claim tremendous credibility. So the evidence is Jesus rose from the dead. That's why I'm convinced when he promises you eternal life, if you trust in him, he ain't blowing smoke. He's speaking the truth.
Cliff says if there's no God, we just rot. That part is true. What he gets wrong is assuming that's a problem. Just because the idea of death is uncomfortable doesn't make something else magically true. That's not evidence. That's wishful thinking. He also says people died for what they saw, as if martyrdom proves truth. But people die for all kinds of beliefs. Muslims, Hindus, even cult members like Heaven's Gate. Dying for something doesn't prove it's real. It just shows how strongly someone believed it. Cliff brings up Jesus' resurrection like it's a historical fact, but we don't have first-hand evidence. The Gospels were written decades later, anonymously, and contradict each other in key details. That's not strong historical data. It's hearsay. Hitchens was right to say, what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And so far, Cliff hasn't given any evidence, just emotional appeals and stories written down 2,000 years ago. Let's hear Matt one more time.
One is this continued objection to, without God, there's no ultimate meaning. There's no real purpose. Well, I don't know what you mean by real purpose. That seems kind of cheaty. But as far as ultimate meaning, yes, I agree. No ultimate meaning in the existential sense that you're talking about it. And it doesn't matter one bit. The car that I've got out there parked in the parking lot, I've had for a couple of years. One of these days, it's going to rot away. Does that mean it's not valuable now? Does that mean it doesn't have any value to me now? I mean, there's no purpose. Should I just go ahead and chuck it now? Let's get rid of it. Eventually, it's going to be useless. That's absurd. We all recognize that things have meaning and purpose right now because they are valuable to us. These are properties that we imbue things with and we imbue people with. Do I matter as much to you as your spouse? Bet you I don't, unless it's you. This idea that without the ultimate meaning, or if something is ultimately meaningless, doesn't mean it is always meaningless, or it doesn't mean it's meaningless in every way. This idea about morality, that it's all relative. Actually, I'm a staunch defender of absolute morality. And despite Cliff's straw man, I'm not saying that slavery is immoral because I said so. It might surprise some people to know that while I don't think there's intrinsic value, I think that there is value in people, and that's the value that we imbue them with. This idea that because I said so is the basis for secular morality is flatly absurd. It's the exact opposite of what I just finished talking about how you go through and you build up this system. We are physical beings in a physical universe that follows physical laws. There are truths to be discovered about how our actions benefit us and how our actions harm us. This is simply true. We don't need another mind. This is about the interaction of minds, but we don't need some transcendent mind to dictate what is true. We discover what is true about the reality that we inhabit. God or not, soul or not, we can choose everything on the list that Cliff just talked about being good to each other and building a productive society and caring and loving and trying to end poverty, trying to end oppression, and trying to build a better society. We can do all of that just because it's the right thing to do. There's no evidence for a soul. In fact, there's good evidence against it. There's no evidence or not enough evidence of the various God claims that are out there, or not any particular good evidence, at least that I've been made aware of. But I could be wrong. And tomorrow, I could find out that there is a God and that I do have a soul. And it wouldn't change very much for me as far as how I end up living my life, because I've already come to good reasons to do things. I'm open to being corrected on them, but what's going to correct me is reason and evidence, not appealing to a God. And if people have asked me, well, what are you going to do if you die and you end up standing before God? Hey, I tried. I used my brain. I followed the evidence where it was. And by the way, if your character is actually accurately depicted in the Bible or the Quran, I don't want nothing to do with you. I'm already morally superior to you. I already care more about people than you do. I know. I've never sanctioned slavery, never sanctioned genocide. Gods have. Do all religions lead to the same God? I don't know. I think it's unlikely. I think they clearly all define God differently. I think you could go right down into the same church on the same pew and get two different people, and they're going to define God differently, and they're going to have different views of God. I think there's as many different religions as there are people trying to practice them. And my concern isn't whether or not they all lead to the same God. It's what kind of world do they end up creating? Because why should I care about an afterlife that I don't know whether or not it exists when I've got a life that I know that I have and I'd like to make it better? And if your religion is impeding on the ability of people who don't practice your religion or those who do from living the best life they can right now, then your religion's a problem. That goes for Islam and Christianity and Scientology and Hinduism and everything. If you're advocating something that is detracting from the good of this world, you're part of the problem.
Does being an atheist require the same faith that believing in God does?
No, seriously. It doesn't require any faith to not believe something. It doesn't. Now, if atheism was this assertion that there are no gods, ooh, I pissed some people off. If atheism was this assertion that there are no gods, well then, yes, you might be able to make a case that that was based on faith, or maybe it's not. It would depend on what the basis, what the foundation for that particular belief was. But atheism in the weak atheism sense of I do not believe this doesn't require faith. I don't believe there's a Bigfoot. That's not a faith. It's not a faith-based position. I'm not asserting certainty that there isn't a Bigfoot. I'm just not yet convinced. The Bigfoot claim hasn't met its burden of proof. Neither of alien abductions, which, by the way, I'll point out, you can actually go talk to real living people right now who will tell you their alien abduction story. Living, breathing people, you can talk to them. They will have stories that are similar in detail. In some cases, there are multiple people who have supposedly experienced this together. In some cases, the things that people have seen have been entire small towns. And you can interview these people. How many people think that they're actually being abducted by aliens? Not me. That's people you can talk to right now. Somebody writes a couple books, in a couple thousand years, somebody could stand up and say, hey, look, I wouldn't believe it, but look at all of these accounts. These are firsthand people. They were interviewed by the news. We have a much better record of what was happening at the end of the 20th and beginning of 21st century than we do about what happened back when Jesus was supposedly alive or back around the time that Hinduism was being formed. This is a real record. We even have video footage of people talking about how they came down. And then they'll start tying it together in an intricate little web, the same way conspiracy theorists do right now. Oh, there were lizard people in the government or crop circles out there. We don't believe any of that, I hope. I am at Texas State. I kind of respect you guys because I don't care about colleges, so we're not in any rivalry. UT. But we don't believe that. Why should we? And yet we're expected to believe what is potentially a more extraordinary claim and weaker evidence. There's nothing particularly extraordinary about a universe that's billions, 13.7 billion years old, that there might be some other life somewhere. I don't know. Probably unlikely they made it this far. No reason for them to pick out Earth because we're not special, despite what many creationists would have you believe. They've got this wily coyote god who straps on a hat and balances on a wire and goes through all...
Matt makes a powerful case here. You don't need God to have meaning, purpose, or morality, and science backs him up. Studies in neuroscience, psychology, and evolutionary biology show that humans are wired for empathy, cooperation, and moral reasoning. Not because of religion, but because these traits helped us survive and thrive as social beings. Purpose doesn't have to come from some ultimate source to be real. It can come from love, family, creativity, curiosity, things we build and share. Just because something ends doesn't mean it was worthless. That's true for life, relationships, and even a good story. As for morality, Matt's right again. Objective moral systems can be built without appealing to a higher power. We observe the consequences of our actions. We learn what causes harm and what creates well-being. That's reason. That's evidence. And that's enough. Matt doesn't pretend to have all the answers. He just refuses to accept bad ones. He's willing to change his mind, but only for a good reason. That's intellectual honesty. And that's the foundation for a better world. So here's the question. If the life you're living now is the only one you're sure you have, what are you doing to make it count?
You made a statement a couple of months ago that I found very interesting. And I don't claim to understand it, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot with it. You said that you were a cultural Christian Okay, and so that raised a number of questions in my mind, and the first question was,
you are changing the subject.
I'm not. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I may be leaping outside of the topic a bit to get back to it.
We can do cultural Christianity, but I think I have a list of questions that you wanted to ask, and that is one of them. But I think Professor Dawkins did ask you...
You were referring to the predictive power and to the utility of the stories.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually what I was trying to zero in on.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that was the point. Well, it seemed to me that your proclamation that you were a cultural Christian was a recognition and a statement that you had found something in the culture that had been derived from Christianity that you had an affinity with, and that there's some reason for that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, well, what do you think that Christianity got right that allows you to make a statement like that? I mean, I know that there's differences perhaps in what we both think about the ultimate veracity of the biblical stories. Maybe there isn't differences. Like, it would take a lot of conversation to figure this out, but what did you mean by that? Like, what do you think that Christianity got right that would enable you to make a statement like that?
Virtually nothing. I meant by that no more than that I'm brought up in a Christian culture. I went to Christian schools. I therefore know my way around the Bible. I know my way around the Book of Common Prayer. I know the hymns. That's all. I don't value Christianity as a truth system at all.
Okay, so let me ask you about that, because maybe that's true and perhaps it's not. So the first question is, like, do you think that there are any marked differences between cultural traditions that would enable you to rank order them in terms of their ethical validity?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so for example, we could contrast mainstream UK Christianity with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a hierarchy.
There is a hierarchy.
Okay, a hierarchy that points to what?
Well, in the case of Islam, I dislike any religion which punishes apostasy with death, that throws gay people off high buildings, that practices clitoridectomy. That seems to me to place Islam on a lower level than Christianity, but that's not to say anything very positive about Christianity.
Well, it might be to say something positive about Christianity. Like, I think that question is open, because you might ask yourself, what did Christianity get right that led it away from those particular presumptions and towards something that you regard as more ethically appropriate? Like, this isn't a trivial question.
It's a very modest claim. There's not very much. I mean, to be better than a religion that throws gay people off high buildings is not really a very virtuous achievement.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true, because if you look at the barbarism that characterizes the human past, you might think that any progression whatsoever towards something approximating mercy and tolerance is nothing short of a bloody miracle.
Well,
like, people are pretty ruthless, and so are our chimpanzee cousins.
Yes, they are.
Right. So,
yes.
So we move forward into the light with great difficulty.
Yes,
and
yes.
The fact that we can take that for granted now, and that it seems self-evident and deserving of faint praise, it's not so clear to me that that's a reasonable proposition.
Okay, let's grant the faint praise, but that has nothing to do with the truth value, and what I care about is the truth value. I see no truth value in the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles. Do you believe in any of those? Do you believe Jesus was born a virgin?
As I said before, there are elements of the text that I don't feel qualified to comment on. My experience has been that the more, I know from a metaphorical perspective and from a mythic perspective what the story of the virgin birth means, and I accept that. I know, for example, that any culture that doesn't hold the image of the woman and infant sacred dies. And I don't know how that needs to be expressed in a form.
Is it true, though?
Do you mean that you don't know?
Well,
Dawkins is making an evidence-based argument. Christianity as a belief system doesn't hold up to scrutiny. There's no empirical evidence for the virgin birth, resurrection, or miracles. None of these claims meet the standards of historical verification. For example, Bart Ehrman, a respected New Testament scholar, points out that the Gospels were written decades after Jesus' death by anonymous authors, full of contradictions and theological bias. That's not reliable evidence, it's religious tradition. When Peterson talks about holding the mother and child sacred, he shifts to metaphor. But metaphors don't prove anything. They might feel meaningful, but they're not evidence for a god, a virgin birth, or divinity. Dawkins stays focused on truth. Peterson avoids the question entirely. When Dawkins is asked something, he gives a clear answer. When Peterson is asked, he deflects. That's why Dawkins calls it out. Maybe Peterson doesn't actually believe these things and doesn't want to admit it. And the idea that Christianity led us toward mercy and tolerance? History doesn't support that. The Inquisition, witch trials, slavery justified by scripture, and opposition to women's rights and science all came from dominant Christian cultures. Progress came in spite of religion, not because of it. Led by secular thinkers like Voltaire, Thomas Paine, Bertrand Russell, and modern human rights advocates. Dawkins is right to say, cultural familiarity doesn't mean truth, and religious comfort doesn't equal evidence. Let's continue watching.
Let me ask you about that, because truth, this is something I talked with Sam Harris about too. Truth, as we know, is a tricky business. Do you think there are differences in the truth claims between different writers of fiction? Like, is Dostoevsky more profound than...
No, well, I wouldn't call fiction truth claims anyway. I mean, these are...
Then on what grounds do we rank order the fiction in terms of quality? Like, Dostoevsky is a profound purveyor of fiction on the philosophical front, unbelievably deep and profound.
Yes,
there's something true about what he's writing about.
It's nothing to do with the truth that science is concerned with. The truth of science is the truth that gets us to the moon. I mean, this is nothing to do with whether one writer of fiction has a sort of insight into human nature. That goes without saying. I accept that.
Okay, so how do we deal with the notion that on the purely factual side, how do we deal with the idea, let's take you talked about clitoridectomy, let's talk about the oppression of women.
Yes.
We make a scientific case that that's inappropriate? Or is it a case that we're making on some other grounds? Like I see in the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the earliest pronouncements is that both men and women carry the image of God, both. And that sets a certain tone to everything that follows. And it is a remarkable proclamation given its radical age, that both men and women carry the image of God and are to be treated as something with intrinsic value outside of the domain of power and politics. And it isn't obvious to me, having thought about this a lot, how we deal with that in the pure realm of fact. Because one of the facts is, if I can oppress you, why the hell shouldn't I?
Yeah, my job is to keep things on track here. I think there are a number of questions which Professor Dawkins has asked quite directly that we still haven't really heard an answer for.
Okay.
And Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth. You started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about. But I think you must understand that when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And by the way, saying I don't know, or saying, I'm not qualified to comment, is an answer to that question, but is that your answer, that you don't know? I
said earlier, and I would hold to this, is that there are elements of the text that I don't know that I'm incapable of fully accounting for. I can't account for what the fundamental reality and significance of the notion of the resurrection is. My knowledge just ends.
Sure, but
I know that whatever happened as a consequence of the origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise. So there's some power in that story that's remarkable.
Let's stick to the virgin birth.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the virgin birth results from a mistranslation of Isaiah. You know that.
Like these sorts of questions, what would you say? They don't strike me as... They're not getting to the point.
I know
the
that.
story
I know
has a purpose.
Yes.
Well, and look, I understand that there's perfect reasons to debate this. I know that, and I know that your question is more than valid. But it's beside the issue as far as I'm concerned, and it's partly because, well, when we started this conversation, I said, for example, that it appears to be the case that a description of the structure through which we see the world is a story. We see the world through a story. And so that's a remarkable thing. That's a remarkable discovery, and it's emerged probably in the last 60 years in multiple disciplines, because we have to prioritize our facts. And so we prioritize them according to a particular pattern. And there are patterns that seem to work and to propagate themselves properly and to orient cultures towards life abundant. And there are other patterns, the pattern of Cain, for example, that lead to absolute bloody devastation. And I don't know exactly how to construe that sort of truth. But we talked about the oppression of women, for example. It's like, how do you make a case on purely factual grounds that women should be treated as equals?
It's a moral question, and
I know that's exactly.
I was dealing with a factual question, which is, did Jesus have a father? And you won't answer it.
Well, Jesus had an earthly father and a heavenly father, like almost all mythological heroes.
So he wasn't born of a virgin, then. So you're saying that Jesus was not born of a virgin?
I said, first of all, that I don't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy in that case. I said the same thing about the resurrection.
It's not a value. It's a simple fact. I mean, did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question.
Dawkins asked a simple question. Was Jesus born of a virgin? Peterson danced around it for minutes without answering. That's exactly the problem Dawkins is pointing out. If the core claims of Christianity can't be answered as facts, they collapse under basic scrutiny. The virgin birth isn't just unverified, it's based on a mistranslation. The original Hebrew word in Isaiah 7:14 is alma, which means young woman, not virgin. The Greek Septuagint mistranslated it as parthenos, meaning virgin, and that error made its way into the Gospels. Scholars like Bart Ehrman and Geza Vermes confirm this. It's not controversial, it's academic consensus. Peterson tries to say these stories are powerful because they moved culture, but power doesn't prove truth. Islam, communism, and Nazi ideology also moved millions. That doesn't make them true. He also claims Christianity elevated women. But the Bible repeatedly treats women as property. Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 22, and even Paul's letters instruct women to submit. The real progress for women came through secular law, civil rights movements, and feminist philosophy, not scripture. And when Dawkins asks again, did Jesus have a human father? Peterson still won't say. That's why Dawkins is right. If the answers don't hold up when plainly asked, then the claims don't deserve to be treated as truth. Let's keep watching.
It's not a value question.
You must understand what you're being asked here, that even if you think that, say, the author of the biblical texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events, Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth. That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point of what the gospel authors were getting at, that first needs to be clarified before you can then begin actually uncovering what the stories are about. So I think Professor Dawkins is asking from a scientific perspective, and maybe you think that that scientific approach is wrong, but if you just take it for a moment, maybe this is how we find out that it is wrong. Let's take a scientific approach, ask the question, did this occur?
I think that it's inappropriate to use a question like that to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
Well, suppose we weren't doing that. Suppose we were asking out of interest. Suppose that we were all here devout Christians, maybe even Jungian Christians, and we thought, this is interesting, over dinner. Do you think it really happened, like scientifically? Would your answer just be, I don't know?
Yes.
And you wouldn't consider it, I mean, it's not an inappropriate question to ask, just on a point of interest.
Right.
Did this really occur? And I think so often people are asking you that, and especially given the context of this conversation, we've heard everything that you're saying about metaphor and myth, but because the question is still then being asked, did it really happen? You know that that's what you're being asked. And the way you just so easily said yes, I wonder why you struggle to do that in so many other circumstances.
I think because I don't look at the situation the same. The way that Dr. Dawkins and I look at the situation are really quite different, and at many, many, many levels. You know, so even on the meme question, for example, you know, like, I know the literature on the history of religious ideas. I see how these ideas have battled across millennia in a manner that is very reminiscent to me of the same sort of claim that Dr. Dawkins is putting forward with regards to meme. I know that literature. Dr. Dawkins doesn't know that literature. And it's very difficult for me to communicate from within the confines of that literature because it's extensive and deep. And we're dealing with things that we don't understand the relationship between metaphoric truth and value-predicated truth and factual truth. We don't understand that. It's a big problem. There's no evidence whatsoever from the scientific perspective that we can orient ourselves in the world merely in consequence of the facts.
Sure.
And that's a fact. And it's a fact that's been detailed out in great detail in the last 60 years by people from a variety of different disciplines. We have to prioritize the facts. That's a value hierarchy. There may be true and false ways of prioritizing facts, but you can't determine the truth or falsehood of the way that you prioritize facts by making reference to the facts. That's a big problem.
Okay, let's talk about that as perhaps a slight detour here, because I think we do need to come back to this Christ resurrection thing. But Professor Dawkins, would you say that underlying the scientific enterprise is a fundamentally unscientific assumption? You can make scientific investigations in the world, but in order to do so, you need to choose what to prioritize. You need to choose what to investigate. You also need to value the truth. You need to have a value and a motivation for doing it in the first place. Those kinds of things cannot themselves be scientifically justified. And so does the scientific enterprise have an unscientific assumption of the space?
I suppose it does. I mean, I think that maybe just be Jordan and Richard, by the way. I think that Jordan prioritizes myth and I prioritize fact. And I think myth is kind of vaguely interesting, but is not the be-all and end-all of my life. I think it's somewhat secondary to scientific fact, the sort of facts that tell us how old the universe is, how old the world is, the history of life, the engineering achievements of landing a spacecraft on a comet. These are the things that science can do. And as I said, the predictions of quantum theory, to come back to that, the predictions of quantum theory, which are verified to a sufficient number of decimal places that it's equivalent to predicting the width of North America to one hair's breadth. Now, that is, however difficult quantum theory is to understand, that is what you can get from quantum theory. Now, the mysteries of the Bible, if they are mysteries, aren't in the same league. I mean, they just don't cut it.
Peterson keeps dodging a basic question. Did the virgin birth or resurrection happen as a fact? He talks about myth, metaphor, and the power of stories, but that's not the issue. Dawkins is asking for evidence, not symbolism. Peterson claims truth can't just be about facts, but that's not how we build reliable knowledge. Science is based on observation, testing, and replication, and it works. We can date the Earth to 4.54 billion years with radiometric dating. We can trace the evolution of life through fossils and DNA. And we can land probes on comets using quantum calculations accurate to fractions of a nanometer. That's truth we can build on. Compare that to the Bible. No evidence for a global flood, no external confirmation of the Exodus, and no verifiable proof of a virgin birth or resurrection. These aren't mysteries. They're claims made without evidence. Peterson wants to treat myth as equal to science, but stories are not substitutes for facts. And when Peterson says Dawkins doesn't understand religious literature, that doesn't change the problem. Truth claims require evidence, not familiarity with ancient texts. Dawkins is right. Prioritizing facts over comforting myths is how we make progress. What do you think? Should society lean on ancient stories, or should we demand truth backed by real evidence?
This isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments, simply by immediately experiencing Him.
The nature of the soul, the significance of the resurrection, and so on. Bertrand Russell put it well when he considered the prospect of there being a teapot in orbit around Mars. If enough people start convincing themselves that there is a teapot in orbit around Mars, then it soon becomes an object of scholarly debate and extraordinarily difficult to disprove by logic, or more reliably by experiment.
Carried out a ministry of miracles and exorcisms. But the supreme confirmation of his claim was his resurrection from the dead. If Jesus really did rise from the dead, then it would seem that we have a divine miracle on our hands and thus evidence for the existence of God. Now, Dr. Atkins says, I know of no evidence that the resurrection did take place. But there are actually 3 established facts recognized by the majority of New Testament historians today, which I believe are best explained by the resurrection of Jesus. Fact number 1. On the Sunday following his crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was discovered empty by a group of his women followers. According to Jakob Kramer, an Austrian scholar who has specialized in the study of the resurrection, by far most scholars hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements about the empty tomb. Fact number 2. On separate occasions, different individuals and groups saw appearances of Jesus alive after his death. According to the prominent New Testament critic of Vanderbilt University, Gert Ludemann, it may be taken as historically certain that the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. These appearances were witnessed not only by believers, but also by unbelievers, skeptics, and even enemies. Fact number 3. The original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having every predisposition to the contrary. Luke Johnson, a New Testament scholar at Emory University, says, some sort of powerful, transformative experience is required to generate the sort of movement earliest Christianity was. N.T. Wright, an eminent British scholar, concludes, that is why, as an historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. There is no plausible naturalistic explanation of these 3 facts. Therefore, it seems to me the Christian is amply justified in believing that Jesus rose from the dead and was who he claimed to be. But that entails that God exists. Finally, number 5, the immediate experience of God. This isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments simply by immediately experiencing him. This was the way people in the Bible knew God. As Professor John Hick explains, to them, God was not an idea adopted by the mind, but an experiential reality which gave significance to their lives. Now, if this is so, then there's a danger that proofs for God could actually distract your attention from God himself. If you're sincerely seeking God, then God will make his existence evident to you. The Bible promises, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. We mustn't so concentrate on the external proofs that we fail to hear the inner voice of God speaking to our own hearts. For those who listen, God becomes an immediate reality in their lives. In conclusion, then, we've yet to see any evidence to show that God does not exist, and we have seen 5 reasons to think that God does exist. Together, these reasons constitute a powerful cumulative case for the existence of God. If Dr. Atkins wants us to believe atheism instead, then he must first tear down all 5 of the reasons that I presented, and then in their place erect a case of his own to prove that God does not exist. Unless and until he does that, I think we can conclude that theism is the more plausible worldview.
When we look at the resurrection claim critically, the evidence falls apart. The Gospels are our only sources for the empty tomb, yet they were written 40 to 70 years after the crucifixion in Greek by people who never met Jesus. Paul, the earliest Christian writer, never even mentions an empty tomb in his letters. In fact, 1 Corinthians 15, his main resurrection passage, only speaks of appearances, which fits experiences of visions, not physical encounters. Psychology explains this well. Grief-induced hallucinations are common. Studies show that up to 30% of widows report sensing or seeing their deceased spouse. Entire groups can share these experiences, like the Marian apparitions at Fatima, witnessed by thousands in 1917, or mass UFO sightings. These don't prove the supernatural. They prove how human perception works. Historically, resurrection myths weren't unique. Osiris in Egypt, Mithras in Persia, and Dionysus in Greece were all said to have died and risen. Christianity emerged in the same cultural environment, and Jewish apocalyptic expectation primed the disciples to reinterpret visions of Jesus as proof of his messiahship. Even the Bible shows contradictions. In Mark, the earliest gospel, the women flee the tomb in fear and tell no one. Mark 16:8. Matthew adds an earthquake and guards. John rewrites the story again with different characters. These are not consistent eyewitness reports, but evolving theology.
Stress that whereas the assertion of God as an explanation of anything has an air of sublime simplicity, that simplicity is an illusion. An omniscient and omnipotent being that can create a universe, some say maintain that universe, that can intrude into the universe to achieve miracles and resurrections, is no simple entity. A God is the apotheosis of complexity, not the apotheosis of simplicity. And the invocation of a God as an explanation of anything, even the warm sentimental feelings that are said to suffuse us in the presence of the Almighty, is in fact the apotheosis of laziness. It's well suited to armchair brains who prefer to indulge in adipose arguments. You're not here, I trust, because you're one of those. Now, the invocation of God as an explanation of anything is an admission of defeat and of ignorance disguised as a pretense of understanding. I've set myself a challenge to show that everything in and of the world of the body and of the spirit can be understood without needing to invoke a God. There's no point in being an atheist, and certainly a scientist, without being rigorously intellectually honest. So I have to set myself an honest target, which is nothing less than complete explanation, nothing fudged, nothing forgotten. The atheist argument fails if in the end it turns out that the universe had to be designed. It fails if any aspect of it had to be made. It fails if it turns out that there had to be a seed the size of a pea or even the size of a proton. We atheists must not cloud the issue. That's for the religious who do it so admirably and on such a cosmic scale. The atheist argument fails if it turns out that there is a purpose for the world. The atheist argument fails if it turns out that there is an afterlife, that miracles occur, or that a God is necessary to maintain the workings of physical law. The atheist argument begins to corrode if there are aspects of the human condition that science cannot touch, such as the supreme joy of artistic creation. That, then, is the challenge. Nothing less than complete explanation. Therefore, inevitably, I have to disappoint you. Science cannot yet explain everything. It cannot yet tell us what went on at the event we call the creation. It cannot yet provide a theory or even a simulation of consciousness. It would be quite wrong of me to pretend that it could. However, what I can hope to do is to present you with a scientific view of the world, a view that makes a convincing case that science can elucidate the great questions that have for centuries been regarded as religion's own. And with your newly cleansed, deprejudiced minds, you should be able to accept that science provides a richer, more comprehensible, more reliable, more deeply satisfying account of the cosmos than the primitive pseudo-explanations peddled by well-meaning but scientifically under-informed apologists. I'll deal with the most difficult problem first, creation ex nihilo. The adipose argument is that God did it. That, of course, is the lazy man's elixir, sort of a cocktail made up of a swig of credulity and a teaspoonful of unwillingness to think. In short, it's an explanation that avoids explanation. Science has moved cautiously but steadily towards the provision of a true understanding. I will not bore you with accounts of the events after the Big Bang, which is now universally believed by scientists to be a broadly correct description of the events immediately following the creation. I want to explore whether it is conceivable that science can elucidate the events at the creation, for that is where the atheist stands on the most dangerous ground. Notice that I intend to confront issues, not evade them. Science proceeds by exposing the true simplicity that underlies perceived complexity. Scientists are hewers of simplicity from complexity. I believe that it is possible for science to formulate an account, and it will be a mathematical account, full of precision, full of logical authority, full of the testability that is such a kingly quality of science, of what went on at the Big Bang, when space-time itself and the laws of nature came into existence. Science can already show that a creator had less to do than perhaps...
The idea of an all-knowing, all-powerful being is not simple. It raises far more questions than it answers. Saying God did it explains nothing. It only shifts the mystery. For example, if the universe requires a designer, then who designed God? By definition, God would be even more complex than the universe we're trying to explain. Science, by contrast, looks for underlying simplicity. The Big Bang theory already shows that the universe can be described by natural laws, without divine intervention. Quantum cosmology suggests the universe could emerge from a quantum vacuum. Nothing, in physics, isn't empty, but a field of energy governed by testable rules. Hawking and Hartle's no-boundary proposal even models a universe without a need for a creator at all. History also shows us that invoking God has been a placeholder for ignorance. Lightning was once Zeus's anger, disease was demonic possession, and the Earth's motion was said to require angels pushing the planets. Every time science advanced, the God explanation shrank. Even in Scripture, contradictions appear when people try to make God an explanation. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 give two different creation orders, evidence of human storytelling, not divine clarity.
It's the eye. Let me present one tiny technical argument this evening. How much electric charge is there in the universe? The answer is none. We know experimentally that there is an equal amount of positive and negative charge, which if summed together gives zero charge overall. At the creation, no charge separated into opposite charges. Nothing separated into opposites. Secondly, and more potently, how much material is there in the universe? Another way to answer this question is to ask how much energy there is in the universe. For Einstein showed that mass and energy are equivalent. When the sum is done, and that involves adding together all the masses of all the protons, all the people, all the priests, all the planets, all the stars and all the galaxies, as well as the gravitational attraction between them, the answer is close to zero. I suspect that as observations are refined, the total will approach zero. There is no energy in the universe. Nothing did indeed come from nothing. Science shows that the universe is in fact a big confidence trick. There is truly nothing here. All there is a separation of opposites. Now, what that argument shows is that the event that took place at the creation is very much simpler than one might think. God, if he had to do anything, did not have to make anything. All he had to do, if he had anything to do at all, was to separate nothing into equal and opposite components. Now, that doesn't solve the problem of what went on at the creation, but it makes creation ex nihilo a far simpler process than you might have thought. for literally nothing had to be made. That argument at least diminishes God's role. Now, I could also sketch in an argument that suggests how the reorganization of nothing could take place acausally. There is, of course, no causality before the arena of space-time has been established, so it would be absurd to project backwards our familiarity with causality in our current arena and use it as an argument for God in an arena when space-time did not exist. No one knows how space-time came into being acausally, but there are hints. I would like to say what I think happened, but happily Dr. Craig has done that for me. But quite honestly, I don't think it matters what I think what went on at the creation, because it would be just pure speculation. Speculation without the rigor of mathematics and observation is as syrupy a bog as religion. All I want to leave you with is the realization that the universe is an engagingly reorganized form of nothing, and that speculative acausal events are capable of seeing it come into being without intervention. No God was needed to make the universe, or even to make it happen. My argument diminishes the role of a creator God to zero. Another potent argument produced by adipose brains in favor of a mental labor-saving God is the apparent fine-tuning of the structure of the universe as it tumbled into existence. People intent upon proving the hand of a designer bandy about amazing figures, 10 to the this, 10 to the that. We've had tens followed by an imaginable number of zeros already this evening. All such calculations are sort of hocus pocus and bunkum. There is no a priori way of calculating the probability of the existence of the universe. However, I do have to admit that it gives the impression of being well designed. Had I a lazy brain, I would lie back and leave it at that, and accept that design implied designer, and hence a God in one of his disguises. But not having a lazy brain, I look for a simpler explanation. Several spring to mind. One possibility is that by chance the universe tumbled into being with this particular mix of fundamental constants. There's no way of calculating the probability of that, but it would, I concede, be exceedingly remote. Nevertheless, if something can happen, it could happen. Someone wins the lottery. The second possibility is that a universe can come into existence only with a particular mix of fundamental constants. Other universes, some with pi equals 42, others with bright pink electrons weighing a ton, might bubble into incipient existence but collapse again through want of stability or in some way being logically self-inconsistent. A third possibility is that there are trillions and trillions of universes, with trillions more popping up into existence as I speak. Now, I must emphasize that I most definitely do not have in mind the profligate many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which I find personally distasteful. I mean real, actual universes defining their own space-time and with a unique mix of fundamental constants. Some have pi equals 3.15, others have pi equals 3.16, ours happen to have pi equals 3.14, and bingo, it permits the emergence of life. Now, there will be some who say that a trillion universes is more demanding than a single universe with its one creator. That's logical nonsense. An unstructured, unmade, totally chaotic emergence of random universes without a God is a far, far less complex happening than a single, awesomely well-defined universe with an omnipotent creator. One is random, the other structured. Unless you can show explicitly that this random chance event cannot account for all there is, You have no right to resort to the extraordinarily complex proposition that there is a God who did it. Let me turn briefly to the purpose of the universe, which some aver exists and which, they assert, gives credence to an almighty God. It's so important to distinguish real questions that, when answered, illuminate the deep structure of the world from invented questions that elucidate only the psychology of the individual or the society that poses them. Many religious questions are of the second kind. They are windows onto the psyche of the soul, not windows onto the heart of matter. Purpose is an excellent example of the latter, ranking alongside the prospect of an afterlife, the nature of the soul, the significance of the resurrection, and so on. Bertrand Russell put it well when he considered the prospect of there being a teapot in orbit around Mars. If enough people start convincing themselves that there is a teapot in orbit around Mars, then it soon becomes an object of scholarly debate, and extraordinarily difficult to disprove by logic, or more reliably by experiment.
Atkins' argument that the universe could come from nothing isn't speculation. It's rooted in physics. Experiments confirm the total electric charge of the universe equals 0. Positive and negative cancel out perfectly. On top of that, Einstein's equation E equals mc squared shows matter and energy are interchangeable. And when we add up all the mass of stars, galaxies, and people against the negative energy of gravity, the balance is close to 0. In other words, the universe may be a net nothing, no miracle required. This fits what cosmologists like Lawrence Krauss and Stephen Hawking have argued. Quantum mechanics allows particles to pop in and out of existence without cause. At the beginning, before space and time, causality itself doesn't apply. Invoking God doesn't solve the mystery. It only adds an even bigger unexplained entity. As for fine-tuning, the multiverse offers a simple answer. If countless universes exist, each with different constants, then it's no surprise that one, ours, happens to allow life. It's like winning the lottery, unlikely but inevitable for someone. And history shows how purpose has often been invented by religions to explain the unknown, from attributing plagues to divine wrath to claiming the earth was the center of the cosmos. Each time, science replaced superstition with knowledge. Even the Bible reflects human invention. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 give conflicting creation stories, while Ecclesiastes 9:5 bluntly says, "The dead know nothing," undermining the idea of an afterlife. These contradictions highlight myth-making, not divine truth. Atkins is right. Religion explains psychology, not reality. Science gives us testable answers, while faith rests on assumptions. So here's the question. If science can explain the universe without God, why keep clinging to a supernatural answer? Comment your thoughts below. Hit like if you found this breakdown helpful, and subscribe for more deep dives into debates that shape how we see the world.